I want you to do something for me. Just look at your hand for a second. Spread your fingers out as wide as they can go.
Right, on a table or a desk.
Yeah. And for most of us, if you were sitting at a piano, you might be able to stretch an octave. A C to the next C.
Maybe the ninth, if you're lucky. A C to the D above it. That's already pushing it for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, I want you to imagine a hand that can comfortably strike a C, reach all the way past the next C, hit the G above that, and still wrap a thumb around to play an E. That's a 12th.
It's just a biological impossibility for, what, 99% of the population?
It feels like it.
When you see the actual plaster casts that were made of his hands, they don't even look large in a normal way. They look alien, like they were designed by a different species specifically to manipulate a keyboard.
And connected to those massive hands was a man who was, by all accounts, just as imposing, Sergei Rachmaninoff. 6'6". He had this severe buzz cut and a face that Stravinsky, I love this quote, described as a 6'6" scowl.
A living scowl. It's such a codent image, isn't it? He looked like a banker who had just, foreclosed on your family's farm.
Or an undertaker who's seen way too much. He just carried this incredible gravity with him everywhere.
Which is the ultimate irony.
Right, because when people think of Rachmaninoff, they don't think of a cold, severe 6'6" scowl. They think of the most sweeping, tear-jerking, hard-on-your-sleeve romance in the entire history of music.
The Piano Concerto No. 2, the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini.
Yeah.
It is music of pure, unadulterated emotion.
It creates this fascinating cognitive dissonance.
Completely. You have this man of marble on the outside and then this absolute volcano of sentiment on the inside. But the mistake people make, and this is why we're doing this deep dive, is assuming that the sadness in his music was just an act.
Or a style choice.
Right, like he was just cashing in on being the sad Russian guy.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when you really dig into the source material, you look at the letters, the biographies, the eyewitness accounts, you realize the sorrow wasn't a pose. It was the direct product of a life that was essentially a series of catastrophes, one after another.
I mean, he went from aristocracy to utter poverty.
From being the golden boy of Russian music to a refugee fleeing on an open sled. From a prolific, celebrated composer to a man who basically fell silent for decades.
So that's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to strip away the greatest hits playlist and really look at the man himself. We're drawing on some extensive biographical records and musical analysis to piece this whole timeline together.
Right.
We need to figure out how a man who lost his country, his fortune, and for a time his confidence, managed to become the very definition of romanticism.
And to really understand that loss, you first have to understand what he had to lose.
Where he started.
We have to go back to the beginning, back to 1873.
Let's talk about that start because, usually with these great composers, you hear the starving artist trope.
Yeah.
Beethoven moving apartments every other month to dodge the rent, that sort of thing.
Oh, Rachmaninoff didn't start on third base. He started already having scored a home run.
He was born into the Russian aristocracy.
The deep aristocracy. The Rachmaninoff name carried serious, serious weight. They claimed descent from this legendary figure, Vasily Rachman, and even traced a line back to a Moldavian prince.
So this wasn't just, we have a nice house money.
No. This was, we own 5 country estates money.
And his mother brought 5 separate estates into the marriage as part of her dowry.
5. That's generational wealth. That is, you will never have to work a day in your life kind of wealth.
So the obvious question is, how do you go from 5 massive estates to 0 in the span of a single childhood?
Well, you enter Vasily Rachmaninoff, Sergei's father. Vasily is what a character. The sources describe him as incredibly charismatic, a decent amateur pianist himself, but he had what you might call a destructive streak.
A destructive streak.
He was a compulsive gambler, a pathological liar, and a serial philanderer.
The trifecta of financial ruin.
And he was frighteningly efficient at it. In about 10 years, maybe a little more, he managed to squander the entire fortune. One by one, the estates were sold off.
To pay gambling
debts, to fund his lifestyle, you name it. And the most painful loss, especially for young Sergei, was the estate called Oneg.
He talks about Oneg later in life, almost like it was the Garden of Eden, doesn't he?
He does. It was his paradise. It's where he first fell in love with nature, with the Russian landscape. So losing Oneg wasn't just losing a house. For him, it was losing his entire sense of stability.
So by 1882, the family is broke.
Completely destitute. They have to move from this idyllic country estate to a cramped, depressing little flat in St. Petersburg. And of course, the marriage just collapses under the strain.
And it wasn't just the divorce. I mean, the timeline here is just brutal. He loses the estates, the parents split up, his father effectively abandons the family, and then his sister Sophia dies.
Diphtheria. All of this happens before he's even really a teenager. So you have this boy who is already naturally sensitive, and his entire world just implodes.
And without the structure of the estate, without a father figure, he starts acting out.
Completely. He was failing all of his classes at school. He was playing truant, just wandering the streets of St. Petersburg. And this is a detail I find so revealing. He was altering his report cards to hide the failing grades from his mother.
He was on a fast track to nowhere.
Absolutely. But the talent, the musical gift, was undeniable. He'd been taking lessons from his mother, and his grandfather, remember, had studied with John Field. The musical DNA was there.
And that's what saved him.
Right. His older cousin, Alexander Soloti, who was already a huge star pianist, a student of Franz Liszt, no less, he intervened. He looked at the situation and basically said, this boy has a world-class gift, but he is going to throw it all away.
So he recommends a drastic solution.
A very drastic solution. He recommends sending Sergei to Moscow to live with and study under Nikolai Zverev.
Okay, so this is where this story shifts from like a Victorian tragedy to something more like a military school drama. Who was Zverev?
Zverev was a legend in Moscow musical circles. He wasn't just a piano teacher, he was a maker of virtuosos. But his method was, well, it was extreme.
How so?
He took the most talented boys into his own home. He fed them, he clothed them, and he basically owned them, musically and personally. Rachmaninoff moves into Zverev's house in 1885.
And describe this living situation. This wasn't some cozy one-on-one mentorship.
Oh, not at all. Imagine a single bedroom shared by 3 or 4 teenage boys. Zero privacy. And the practice schedule was absolutely rigid. Zverev demanded total, unwavering focus.
I read they had to practice in shifts.
They had to. There weren't enough pianos for all the students, so you might be assigned the 6-bound a.m. slot or late night slot. And you practice for 3 hours straight, intense drilling, while Zverev sat in the next room, just listening.
And if you mess up?
He would storm in. He was a notorious disciplinarian. It was a pressure cooker.
It sounds like it.
But it was also a kind of cultural boot camp. Zverev took them to the opera, to symphony concerts, to high society dinners. He wasn't just training pianists. He wanted to breed gentleman artists.
And it worked.
It absolutely worked. This is where Rachmaninoff built that ironclad, flawless technique. If you ever wonder how he could later play the most brutally difficult repertoire in the world without even breaking a sweat, it's because of those years in Zverev's house.
But there's a flaw in Zverev's master plan.
A big one.
He wanted to build pianists. He wanted to build perfect machines for playing music. But Rachmaninoff wanted to create music.
And that, in Zverev's world, was the forbidden fruit. As Rachmaninoff gets older, he's around 16 now, he starts hearing his own melodies. He needs quiet. He needs space to write them down.
And you can't compose a symphony in a bedroom with 3 other guys practicing their scales.
You cannot. So he makes a very reasonable request. He asks Zverev for a private room, a separate piano, so he can compose.
A reasonable request to us, maybe.
Not to Zverev. To Zverev, composition was a distraction. It was a waste of a pianist's God-given talent. When Rachmaninoff asked for privacy, Zverev took it as a deep personal insult. He just exploded.
And what happened?
He threw Rachmaninoff out of the house, just kicked him out. And he refused to speak to him for years.
This keeps happening to him. First, the father figure abandons him. Now his mentor figure completely rejects him. He's 16 years old, essentially homeless again, and cut off from the man who had shaped his entire life.
But this is where you get the first real glimpse of his spine, of his resilience. He didn't crawl back and apologize. He moved in with some relatives, the Satins, and he just doubled down on composing.
He decided to prove Zverev wrong.
And he did. He graduated from the conservatory a year early in 1892. And for his final exam, he was required to write a 1-act opera.
Aleko.
He wrote it from start to finish in 17 days.
I want to just pause on that for a second. 17 days. To write an entire opera, orchestration, vocal parts, everything.
Yeah.
That's Mozart-level speed.
It really is. And it wasn't some rush job. It was brilliant. He won the conservatory's Great Gold Medal, which was this almost impossibly high distinction. Only 2 other students in the entire history of the conservatory had ever won it.
And, maybe more importantly, he gets the nod from Tchaikovsky.
The ultimate endorsement. Tchaikovsky himself was at the premiere. He was applauding until his hands hurt. He apparently told Rachmaninoff, "I am so happy that you have begun to write. For a 19-year-old Russian composer, that's like being knighted by the king."
So he's on top of the world. He's the next big thing in Russian music. And around this time, he writes this this little piece for piano, the prelude in C-sharp minor.
Ah, yes, the piece that ate his life.
The famous Bells of Moscow piece, bum, bum,
Yeah,
and everyone knows it.
Everyone wanted to hear it.
Why was it a curse? It was a massive hit.
It was a monster hit. It went viral before viral was even a concept. But the problem was Rachmaninoff, being young and needing cash, sold it outright to a publisher for a flat fee. The sources say about 40 rubles, maybe 50. He never saw another penny from it. Meanwhile, the publisher is printing money hand over fist for decades.
But the fame must have helped him, surely.
It made him famous, but it also pigeonholed him. Audiences demanded it everywhere he went for the rest of his life. Can you imagine being a serious artist, having written symphonies and concertos, and every single time you walk on stage, someone in the audience yells, "Play the prelude"?
It became a joke to him.
He came to absolutely loathe it. He felt like a jukebox that only had one record people wanted to hear.
But the prelude was, just an annoyance. The real disaster, the event that nearly ended his career before it began, was the First Symphony, 1897.
This is the turning point. He'd spent 2 years working on the symphony. It was ambitious, it was innovative, dark, complex. He poured everything he had into it.
And the premiere was a big deal, St. Petersburg.
A very big deal. It's in the rival city to Moscow. The conductor was Alexander Glazunov, a very famous composer in his own right.
And Glazunov was not at his best that night.
That is the most charitable interpretation, yes. The more realistic one, which is supported by Rachmaninoff's wife and others who were there, is that Glazunov was drunk.
Drunk on the podium.
It seems so. The performance was a complete train wreck. The orchestra was lost. The tempos were all over the place. It apparently sounded like utter chaos. Rachmaninoff was so horrified he fled the hall and was hiding in a stairwell covering his ears.
Wow.
He couldn't even bear to listen to it.
And the critics, they didn't blame the conducting, they blamed the music.
They savaged him. The review by César Cui is legendary for its cruelty. It's one of the most vicious reviews in music history. He wrote that if there were a conservatory in hell,
Oh, I know this one.
Rachmaninoff's symphony would be the top prize. He called it a musical depiction of the 7 plagues of Egypt.
A conservatory in hell. That phrase just sticks with you.
It stuck to Rachmaninoff like a brand. You have to remember, under that 6'6" scowl, he was incredibly thin-skinned and prone to self-doubt. He didn't just get a bad review, he shattered.
He describes it like having a stroke.
Yeah, he said he felt like a man who had suffered a stroke and had lost the use of both his head and his hands. He fell into this deep, catatonic depression.
For 3 years.
3 years of almost total silence. He didn't compose a note. He barely played the piano. He just lay on a couch in his cousin's apartment, staring at the ceiling, completely convinced he was a fraud and his career was over.
This is where the story gets really psychological. Because he doesn't get out of this with medication. He doesn't get out with a vacation. He gets out of it with hypnosis.
Dr. Nikolai Dahl. The family was desperate. They had tried everything, so they sent him to see Dr. Dahl, who was an amateur musician himself. But his main practice was as a neurologist who was experimenting with this new technique of hypnotherapy.
So Rachmaninoff starts seeing him every day.
Every single day.
What was the treatment like? Was it psychoanalysis? Tell me about your father?
Yeah.
That kind of thing?
No, it was much more direct. It was a form of autosuggestion. Dahl would put him in a light trance and just repeat the same mantra over and over again.
What was the mantra?
You will begin to write your concerto. You will work with great facility. The concerto will be of excellent quality.
It sounds almost too simple to work. Just telling him, you will write a good concerto.
But maybe for a mind like Rachmaninoff's, which was just trapped in this negative feedback loop of self-doubt, maybe he needed a calm, authoritative external voice to overwrite that internal critic.
And it worked?
It worked. The creative block just dissolved. He
Yeah.
started hearing music again. And what poured out of him was the Piano Concerto No. 2.
Which opens with those famous chords. We talked about his hands earlier, and this is where it really matters. That opening isn't just a series of chords, it's a sound effect.
It's bells. This is one of the crucial keys to understanding his music. He grew up in Novgorod and Moscow, cities just filled with the sound of church bells. That deep, resonant, oscillating sound of huge bronze bells is baked into his musical DNA.
And the opening of the second concerto is him turning the piano into a bell tower.
Exactly. You need those massive hands to voice those huge chords so that they actually ring and don't just sound like a clunk.
And, of course, the concerto is dedicated to Dr. Dahl.
Yes, to Monsieur Dahl. He knew. He acknowledged that without that man's intervention, That music might have stayed locked inside him forever.
So the second concerto premieres in 1901. It's a colossal success. He is back. He marries his first cousin, Natalia Satina.
Which took some doing.
Right, the church forbade it.
They had to use some military connections to find a priest who was willing to perform the ceremony in secret, but by all accounts, they were completely devoted to each other for their entire lives.
And he enters this sort of golden era. He's the conductor at the Bolshoi Theater.
And a very strict one. He was heavily influenced by Wagner's ideas about conducting. He made the orchestra stand when he came on the podium. He insisted on moving the players down into the orchestra pit. These were innovations in Moscow at the time.
He's writing his second symphony, The Isle of the Dead. I want to touch on Isle of the Dead for a second because it brings up the other major obsession in his music. We have the bells.
And we have skeletons.
The Dies A.
Exactly. It's this ancient Gregorian chant from the Middle Ages about the Day of Judgment. Da-da-da. A very simple, ominous melody. Rachmaninoff was obsessed with it. For him, it's a musical symbol for death, for fate, for inevitability. He hides it in almost all of his major works.
Why do you think he was so fixated on it? Was he just morbid?
I think he was a realist about mortality. He had a deep fear of death, but also a profound fascination with it. The Isle of the Dead is a tone poem based on a black and white painting of a boat crossing a river into the underworld. He even uses an unusual 58 time signature to mimic the sound of the oars dipping in the water. It's incredibly haunting.
So this period, from about 1901 to 1917, this was his peak.
His absolute peak. He finally had enough money to buy and restore his own beloved estate, Yamovka. He had tractors. He loved farming and agricultural technology. He had his family. He got his composing. He was rooted.
And then the world broke. 1917, the Russian Revolution.
It's almost impossible for us to overstate the trauma of this. The revolution targeted the very class of people that Rachmaninoff belonged to. The landed gentry, the aristocracy.
And his estate, Ivanovka, was seized.
Seized by social revolutionaries. They basically trashed the place. There are stories of them throwing his piano off the balcony, burning his library.
Did he see this happen?
He went back to the estate one last time after the initial February Revolution, and he saw the way the peasants, who he thought he had a good paternalistic relationship with, were looking at him. He saw the red rooster, as they called it, the fire starting in the distance. He knew that if he and his family stayed, they would be killed.
So they fled to Moscow. But Moscow wasn't safe either.
Nowhere was safe. He needed an exit strategy.
And he gets one by sheer dumb luck.
Complete luck. An invitation arrives for him to perform a series of concerts in Scandinavia. He uses it as a pretext to get visas for his whole family. They leave St. Petersburg in December of 1917.
And the description of this escape is just cinematic. It's not a comfortable train ride out of the country.
No. They took a train to the Finnish border, but at the border, the tracks just ended. They had to switch to an open sled.
An open sled. In December.
In the dead of a Nordic winter. Picture this. A blizzard is blowing. Rachmaninoff, his wife Natalia, and their 2 young daughters are huddled together in the sled. They have a couple of small suitcases with clothes, and he has a few notebooks of musical sketches, including his unfinished opera, Mona Vanna.
And that's it.
That's it. He leaves everything else behind. The estates, the money, the artwork, his scores, his entire past.
He crosses the border into Finland, and he never sets foot in Russia again.
Never. And by all accounts, he felt that loss like an amputation every single day for the rest of his life.
But now he's got a very practical, very urgent problem. He's 44 years old, he has no money, he has a wife and 2 daughters to support, and he's stuck in Stockholm in the middle of winter. How does he feed them?
This is what I call the great pivot. In Russia, he was a composer who also conducted and played the piano a bit. But composition pays slowly, if it pays at all. He realized very quickly that the only way to make fast, substantial money was to become a full-time, touring concert pianist.
He had to become a hired gun.
A virtuoso for hire, essentially. But there was a massive catch.
He didn't have a repertoire.
He didn't have a repertoire. He had mostly played his own works in public. He didn't have the Beethoven sonatas, the Chopin etudes, the Schumann concertos, the Liszt rhapsodies ready to perform at a world-class professional level.
So at age 44, an age when most concert pianists are starting to rest on their laurels, he has to go back to boot camp.
Zverev-level boot camp, but self-imposed this time. He rented a house and just practiced like a demon 8-10 hours a day. He learned decades of the standard piano repertoire in a single season.
And this is where that incredible physiology we talked about at the start must have saved him.
Oh, absolutely. If he didn't have those hands, that freakish flexibility and massive reach, he almost certainly would have injured himself trying to learn that much difficult music that quickly.
And there's a medical theory about those hands, isn't there?
Yeah.
That it wasn't just luck, it might have been a condition.
For a long time, the prevailing theory was Marfan syndrome, which gives you those long, spindly limbs and spider-like fingers. But Marfan's usually comes with serious heart defects and vision problems, which he didn't really have.
So what's the newer theory?
A more recent paper from 2006 suggests it might have been acromegaly. It's a disorder of the pituitary gland that can cause gigantism, abnormally large hands, and a coarsening of the facial features. It fits the hands and the famous scowl perfectly.
So his medical condition, ironically, might have given him the physical tools he needed to survive his exile.
It's a fascinating thought. So he builds this repertoire. He moves to America in 1918. And this is the chapter of his life that I think is the most fascinating because he lives this complete double life.
How so? To the public, he's still the gloomy Russian ghost, the 6'6" scowl.
Exactly. But in private.
In private, he became very American in some ways.
He loved the technology. He loved cars.
He was a gearhead.
A huge gearhead. He bought a new car almost every year. He loved driving fast. There's a story of him terrifying his passengers by just speeding through the winding roads of Beverly Hills later in his life.
And when he built his villa in Switzerland?
Villa Sinar on Lake Lucerne, first thing he bought was a speedboat. And he'd be out there on the lake, the stoic, unsmiling Russian giant, just tearing across the water at top speed.
It just contradicts the public image so perfectly.
It does. And he made a fortune in America. He signed with RCA Victor. He had an exclusive relationship with Steinway Pianos. He lived in this beautiful, large apartment on West End Avenue in New York. He had servants, a chauffeur. He dressed impeccably.
But inside that apartment, it was a time capsule.
It was 1917 Moscow. They spoke only Russian. They ate only Russian food. They celebrated Russian Orthodox Easter. He refused to assimilate culturally, even as he was succeeding wildly in the American financial system.
But the tragedy, the real tragedy of these American years, is the silence. We talked about how prolific he was in Russia.
Dozens of major works.
So how many pieces did he complete in the U.S.?
In the 25 years he lived in exile, from 1918 until his death in 1943, he completed only 6 major works.
6 in 25 years.
It's just heartbreaking. He said it himself in a famous quote, "I left behind my desire to compose. Losing my country, I lost myself also."
He really believed that his inspiration was tied to the Russian soil.
He did. To the sound of the language, to the smell of the earth at Ivanovka, to the ringing of the Moscow church bells. Without that rootedness, he felt the well just ran dry.
Plus, he must have been exhausted.
Constantly. He was playing 50, 60, sometimes 70 concerts a season. He was living on trains, in hotels. That kind of just drains the creative spirit.
But the music he did manage to write, it wasn't bad.
Not bad is the understatement of the century. It was different, though. It was sharper, leaner, more modern in some ways. The Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, which he wrote in 1934, is a masterpiece of wit and virtuosic precision.
And this is probably a good time to talk a bit more about his actual compositional style, because critics, for a long time, just dismissed him as gushing or sentimental.
Yeah, but there's a theorist, Joseph Yasser, who argued that Rachmaninoff was doing something incredibly advanced that he called intratonal chromaticism.
That sounds like a mouthful. Break that down for us.
Okay, think of it like a rubber band. In a lot of late Romantic music, like Wagner, the music wanders further and further away from its home key, and maybe it never really comes back. It just floats.
Right.
Rachmaninoff doesn't do that. He keeps one foot firmly planted in the home key, but he stretches the harmony, that rubber band, as far as it can possibly go with all these complex chromatic outside notes. He creates this immense tension, pulling and pulling and pulling, but he always eventually snaps it back home.
So that powerful emotional punch you feel in his music isn't just cheap sentimentality. It's the physics of tension and release.
Exactly. It's structural. It's brilliantly calculated. He had this theory he called the culminating point. He believed every single piece of music had one specific peak, one single moment where that rubber band snaps. And the entire performance had to be architected around leading to and falling away from that single point. If you missed it, the whole performance failed.
Let's move to the end of his life, the 1940s. The world is at war again.
And he's an old man now, and he's tired. His health is failing. He has sclerosis, high blood pressure. His doctors tell him the brutal New York winters are killing him, and he needs to move to a warmer climate.
So he moves to Beverly Hills, Rachmaninoff in Beverly Hills. It just sounds like the setup for his sitcom.
It must have been a surreal community. You had Rachmaninoff, you had Stravinsky, Vladimir Horowitz, the writer Thomas Mann, all these European exiles living under the California sunshine. He actually bought a house on Elm Drive.
But he didn't stop working.
He couldn't. He felt he needed the money to support his extended family and also for the Russian war relief efforts. So he went on one last tour in 1942.
Then it didn't go well.
He was in obvious pain, serious pain. He started having to cancel concerts, which was something he almost never did. He was finally diagnosed with a very aggressive form of melanoma, skin cancer.
And there's one final sad irony involving his passport.
Yes. For 25 years, he had been a man without a country. He traveled on something called a Nansen passport, which was a special document for stateless refugees. But in February of 1943, literally weeks before he died, he finally took the oath and became a U.S. citizen.
He finally belongs somewhere, at least on paper.
Just in time to die. He passed away on March 28, 1943.
And his final wish?
He wanted to be buried at Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow. It's where Chekhov and Scriabin were buried. He wanted to go home.
But it's 1943, the height of World War II. The Cold War is already brewing.
The Soviet authorities were not going to help. And the U.S. government certainly wasn't going to arrange to ship a body to the USSR. So the most quintessentially Russian of all composers is buried in Valhalla, New York.
And even after his death, he couldn't seem to catch a break. The critics came for him one last time.
The 1954 edition of the Grove Dictionary of Music. This is supposed to be the encyclopedia of record, the official word. And the entry on Rachmaninoff essentially dismissed him as a relic. It called his music monotonous, artificial, and gushing.
And it predicted his popularity wouldn't last.
It's incredible how wrong they were.
Artificial.
They completely mistook popularity for shallowness. They had this snobbish idea that because the public loved his music so much, it must be bad. Harold Schoenberg, the great critic for the New York Times, later slammed that entry. He called it outrageously snobbish and even stupid. And he was right. Rachmaninoff is now firmly, unshakably in the pantheon.
He survived the critics, just like he survived the revolution.
He did.
So here's the question I want to leave with. We look at this life, the destroyed childhood, the crippling depression, the exile, the creative silence. It was a relentlessly hard life.
Relentlessly.
If he hadn't suffered so much. If that first symphony had been a smash hit. If he had just stayed a wealthy, happy landowner in Russia. Do we get the Rachmaninoff that we know?
I don't think so. I really don't. I think if he stays in Russia, comfortable and successful, maybe he becomes a very good, very prolific composer. But does he find that specific, crushing, emotional depth? I think the sorrow in his music is the sound of something being irrevocably lost. You can't fake that sound. He had to lose his world to write the music that makes us all feel the loss of ours.
But that's a heavy thought, that the music we love so much is basically the scar tissue of his trauma.
In a way, yes. He was the man who lost everything, but somehow he managed to keep the music.
So the next time you hear that incredible swell in the Second Piano Concerto, don't just think romance. Think of the iron hands, the sled in the blizzard, the hypnotherapy sessions, and the sheer force of will it took to keep playing. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Sergei Rachmaninoff.
We'll see you on the next one.